Marriage is propaganda invented by men to trap women. And I love that men always act like it's the opposite way around. Marriage was always men's idea. It was never women's idea. And that right there should tell you everything you need to know as a woman, right? Marriage was invented to trap and use you for your labor. And that's why women, even to this day, in a lot of countries, lack human rights, because women are just a tool for the patriarchy. Marriage is a tool that keeps them securely attached and serving the structure of the patriarchy. You guys want to know why marriage was really created? Let me show you. 8,000 years ago, 17 women reproduced for every one man. Before the institutions of marriage were created, the natural outcome of natural selection between men and women literally led to 60% of males not reproducing whatsoever. They say in the article it was like there was a mass death of males. They were there, so what were they doing? Good question. Their strongest hypothesis is that somehow back then only a few men accumulated lots of wealth and power, therefore leaving nothing for the others. And so the chances of reproductive success were higher for women with men who had resources and wealth and power. And only after thousands and thousands of years, as the wealth got more spread out, did men start becoming more successful in passing on their genes. But when you really think about that fact, you have to understand that marriage literally was created and designed to trap women, not men. When we look at reasons why marriage was created, secure environment for the perpetuation of the species, a system of rules to handle the granting of property rights, and the protection of bloodlines. All of these things sound like things that would only matter to men because they were the ones that had the property rights and the power, and the bloodlines were tracked by men's last name. Institution of marriage handled these needs. To me, this just sounds like laws and language were used to turn women into a tool for men, for the perpetuation of the patriarchy. Even though these children would be literally created by women, they would get the man's last name, they would carry on the bloodline of the man, and inheritances used to also go to male heirs. So that women would have to what? Get married. That if you were born as a woman, you didn't get an inheritance, because then you would have power and freedom to move about the world in the way that you want. But inheritances were very carefully kept out of the hands of women. They were not allowed to access their own inheritance. If a woman wanted to get her inheritance from her parents, she would have to have a male child. That's again because men have a harder time reproducing than women do. Women are more selective, so the only way to combat that was to trap them in institutions of marriage. Now, who decided whom they would marry and whom they would have children with? It was men, and this was written into the rules. So yes, marriage is a scam and it's propaganda created by men to benefit men, so that men can hold the reproductive power over women artificially. Does that remind you of anything that's happening right now, perhaps? Marriage's primary purpose was to bind women to men and to guarantee that a man's children were truly his. Through marriage, a woman became a man's property. In the betrothal ceremony of ancient Greece, a father would hand over his daughter with these words: "I pledge my daughter for the purpose of producing legitimate offspring." A tool, okay? She has a purpose to produce legitimate offspring, because the only way back in those days that would ever know if an offspring was yours or not is by keeping a woman pure from other men until marriage. That's where all that started, is because men wanted to know which baby was whose. That's not really a problem for women. Women always know which baby is theirs. But we're not done yet with how much of a propaganda it is, because that's really not even the worst part about marriage. When you talk about marriage existing for the purpose of like handing over property rights and like creating legitimate children, that's one thing, but you'll notice that in those situations you would have to have resources. Like marriage was very much a business agreement, a business decision between two men. Even the groom oftentimes had no say in it, but men were also often allowed to take other wives and have concubines and everything like that. It would only be that you, as a woman, you would be the only one that's expected to be faithful in a marriage, because the purpose of a marriage was for the man to know that the kids are his. So he can go out there and mess around with whoever he wants, as long as he has one woman at home where she is trapped and she cannot go outside, she can't drive, she doesn't have money. Why? To prevent her from having sex with other men, or to prevent other men from raping her. Men know how dangerous other men are. That's why they used to keep women locked up inside, because they really wanted to make sure that the only baby in there was theirs. And to me, that's probably the biggest reason of what caused marriage to happen. Women had to be forced into this type of arrangement because, again, before this, they were out reproducing men. Why? Because if men are violent, grapey, they don't want to take care of children, aka they don't bring anything to the table that's like beneficial to women. Women don't want to just have sex with somebody once and then be stuck for many years trying to raise and take care of a child by themselves. But women got very, very, very picky because most men were not worth mating with. And honestly, I think at first it took thousands of years for the situation to actually improve in any way, because the wealth and resources had to be spread around so that there wasn't as few eligible mates for women. But really, marriage was invented for business. It was a business deal, a business transaction. It was like, you give me this many sheep, I'll give you this many cows. They were just using women as tools in the same way that they were using livestock as tools. They were using women as tools of legitimate procreation or just as tools of pleasure, but these were typically like the commoner women, like the concubines. Those were literally your only two options. Like either you were very beautiful or something and your dad could sell you and like use that to build his wealth. So men were very much like incentivized by the system to not give their daughters freedom because daughters were like a legitimate wealth building tool for a lot of men. Or your dad had a lot of money and wanted to make a business alliance with somebody else's dad. Basically a way of joining together two wealthy bloodlines. I mean, we still see this to this day. Like rich people don't really marry outside of their class for that reason, because their parents would be very upset with them. Marriage is a very effective way to bind wealth together and to preserve wealth. Even for people who weren't super economically rich or wealthy, marriage was still very much a tool. And it was still depended upon as like ensuring resources for your family. This article says everything you did had to be done for the simple sake of survival. Marriages were arranged by families not because they liked each other, and especially not because they loved each other, but because their farms went together nicely. And the families could share some wheat or barley when the next flood or drought hit. Now, this part is very interesting. Marriages were a purely economic arrangement designed to promote the survival and prosperity of both extended families. So, if Junior gets the tingles in his pants and wants to run away with the milkmaid across town, this wasn't just an inconvenience, this was a legitimate threat to the community's survival, and it was treated as such. In fact, this kind of behavior was so treacherous in young men that most ancient societies cut a lot of young boys' balls off so they wouldn't have to deal with their philandering. This had a side benefit of producing excellent-sounding boys' choirs, apparently. And it says down at the very bottom, you probably can't see, so I'll read it to you. It wasn't until the industrial age that things began to change. People began taking up work in city centers and factories, and so their economic futures were no longer tied to the land on which they were born, or like the land that their parents owned. Basically, they could go outside, go work in a factory, come home with a paycheck, and it wasn't at all dependent on farming or droughts or floods. Thus, romantic love was invented. And romantic love really was invented to like sell literature back in the 1800s. It was picked up by the 19th and 20th century for the same exact reasons. Basically, the whole Don Draper, men like me invented love to sell you stockings kind of thing. I mean, they definitely had more choice than in the 17th agricultural century. It wasn't so much what are we going to do if you leave the farm and like we need farm hands and your mother's too old to have any more children. Like it was less of that and more of like there's no cows to take care of at home, there's no farm to plow, so you're actually just another mouth to feed. Romantic love was like kind of tying up a bunch of these loose ends. Marriage was still necessary for women, I'd argue maybe even more so now, to survive, because they still didn't have rights of their own. They didn't have employment rights, they couldn't move freely about. And so the way that you would receive a lot of your rights as a woman is by either having family money or by marrying a man. For most parents were more than happy with that because they no longer needed farmhands. So they would just marry their daughters off so that they would no longer have to take care of them. And there was a lot of pressure to marry. And in these like non-arranged marriages, there was still a lot of parental involvement, and there was a lot of like protecting the woman's sexuality. So all these rules about whom she can and can't be seen with so that there's no assumptions. There's rules you have to wait to start a conversation. All of this was still done to protect and ensure women's purity. So women are still just like tools in this whole arrangement. And marriage is still propaganda. Like, just because marriage and courting became like almost an art form, this art form was still mostly for men, and it was invented by men. It was like knights that would write letters to their ladies and like promise them faithfulness and all that because they wanted to lock the women down at home. It was always made as a way to control women, especially women who had very little choice and say otherwise in their own destiny and in their own life. And basically by the time we get back around to the 20th century, marriage is more of like a business-driven deal again, but this time in a different way. So this time it was more to keep the workforce productive and to escape from the drudgery of everyday life and the harsh realities of the Great Depression and later World War II. Happily Ever After was an easy sell because people wanted to believe it. They needed hope in a time of turbulence and uncertainty. That's why love was very much capitalized on with like Hollywood and Disney, like romantic love centered ideas of it. And they were pushing novels, movies, and songs that push the narrative of romance into the mainstream. What's the word for that? Like when people put a bunch of like messaging and ideas in like films and media and music and all that to drive the collective in a certain direction. What is that word? Prop something. People don't really say this quiet part out loud, but the truth is, the reason why marriage is being pushed so heavily is because women can be used as an outlet for men's violence that they would otherwise go and cause out in the streets. It's funny to me that people are like, oh yeah, and then for no reason, the Hollywood industry just started pushing romantic love as a thing, and like, they just wanted people to have hope and gusto for life. Nobody remembers about the gangs of the 1920s. Nobody remembers the men that were literally causing havoc everywhere. Nobody wants to mention that as a cause for marriage being pushed down everybody's throat again, but I will. I'll say it if nobody else will. That is why men will become violent. It's just nice for them to be able to have a silent, compliant, submissive punching bag. Otherwise, they're going to go out and take to the streets. Or even worse, they will refuse to be a productive member of society and rot in their grandmother's basement. Neither of that works for capitalism, industry, innovation, the factories. Like, none of that works. None of that works for our capitalist overlords. So women are once again expected to become a tool for the patriarchy in order to ensure the patriarchy's survival. They are expected and encouraged to marry men, to settle for men that they don't like out of some duty or debt to society. Like some of these pundits will literally come out and say, you know, Jordan Peterson will come out and say, we need to give every man a wife. That's how we prevent violence and the male loneliness epidemic. This is a man that men listen to. They don't want to admit this part, even though he says it. I beat this drum every day, but marriage literally has so many net positives for men because it's happening at the expense of women. And the way that things are shifting in the 21st century is a quarter century ago, when fewer women went to college, there was a plentiful supply of potential mates for men who only had a high school diploma. Even men who dropped out of high school could get blue-collar jobs, paying decent wages, and could expect to find and support a wife. As women started climbing the educational ladder, first equaling and then surpassing men in college attendance and graduation rates, the pool of potential partners shrank. Men literally use marriage to control women, because as soon as women start becoming harder, more difficult to control, the first thing that they stop doing, that women stop doing, is getting married. Men always want to get married. The rates for men getting married were like basically 100% when women were not allowed to work, go to college, earn money, drive, own property, nothing. In 1980, only 6% of men in their early 40s at all levels of education and 5% of women in their early 40s had never married. By 2004, mind you, this was 20 years ago, this portion had increased to 16.5% of men and about 12.5% of women. Only when women stop wanting to get married, it's when women stop relying on men, that marriage rates go down. That's again how you know that it's propaganda. It's literally brainwashing, because women don't want to do it. Women have to be trapped into marriage every time. They have to be trapped by lack of resources, lack of money, lack of education. Otherwise, they want nothing to do with men. Men don't provide enough on their own. They have no ability to bring something to a woman's table when the woman is not being starved into even sitting down at somebody else's table. Women are very self-sufficient. It's men who are not. So this article says there's no conclusive evidence that marriage helps men, which is not true. There is conclusive evidence of that. In the same breath, it says, still, some social scientists worry that not marrying may further marginalize men who are already struggling. So marriage does help men. So it does help men. Super weird wording on that, but whatever. According to the study, it's changing women's expectations about what married life should be that has put more attention into these relationships. So as women are asking for more from marriage, basically they're asking men to do what women have always done in marriage. Now that we are equal in other things, we should also be equal in what we bring to a marriage. If we are equal in income, if anything, women can provide much more than a man can provide to a woman, because they are able to grow a child and give birth to it. Men can't do that. So women are equal in education, equal in income, equal in everything, and men can't handle picking up after themselves around a house, cooking a meal every once in a while, doing some laundry. They're not being asked that much of, and yet they're still failing, because marriages exist to artificially support men, like on life support, at the expense of women. It's a scam, ladies. Don't fall for the propaganda and only marry a man that would improve your life. Like, not be a burden on you, not be somebody you have to serve, not be somebody whose career is going to skyrocket because somebody's doing laundry, cooking for him, cleaning for him, giving him good advice, styling him. Don't give a man all that unless he's doing as much or more for you, because remember, you can also give him a child, which is literally priceless. Which literally, as we see, that without the institution of marriage, only one man would reproduce for every 17 women. You hold the power, ladies. Remember that. This is why they're always trying to take it away from you. This is why they're always trying to strip your rights. Think about that before you give anybody your hand in marriage. You are the prize, and the data backs that up. Stay safe out there. I love you so much. Godspeed.